And for much more on last night's debate, joined by Nancy Cordes and Major Garrett in St. Louis. And Major, I do want to ask you about Governor Mike Pence in just a moment. But to begin, the Trump campaign entered last night under fire, looked to frame the debate early, even before it actually began. What went into that decision to have Donald Trump take the stage with Bill Clinton's accusers, in fact, an hour before the debate started?
Think about it this way. Back in the old days, when there was an oil well fire, what did you do to put it out? You would explode dynamite to take all the oxygen away from it to kill the fire. That's exactly what they tried to do last night. They had a fire underneath their campaign. This massive revelation about the tape from 2005 with Billy Bush of Access Hollywood. So what did they have to do? They had to explode some other form of dynamite to take all the oxygen away from that conversation, or at least attempt to do so. And on Friday and Saturday and a good part of Sunday, this was the internal conversation in the Trump campaign. How willing was Trump to do that, to explode the dynamite to try to take the oxygen away from that? He was more than willing to do it. So the idea was use as an act of diversion, as a counterpoint, and then move on to other parts of the debate prep that they had done, and were successfully preparing Trump to deliver all these attack lines that he didn't deliver in the first debate. And in the end, having seen Trump do both, the Trump inner circle was very pleased with last night's debate performance. It's going to have to soak in deeply around in the country's consciousness to find out, all of us to find out, how successful it was. But that was their thinking behind it.
Josh, this was essentially the nuclear option, the Hail Mary, whatever you want to call it. And the Clinton campaign had been arguing, because they knew it was likely coming, that it would backfire, that it would simply engender more sympathy for Hillary Clinton, especially among women. And the big question that all of us had was how she would respond, what she would say when Donald Trump confronted her with her husband's past infidelities and past behavior. And she essentially decided to sidestep it. She really didn't go there. She said it wasn't true, but then pivoted and started talking about Donald Trump again. So it's clear now what her strategy is just to not give those arguments the oxygen that they need to continue to exist in the political discussion.
And yet, Major, that tape was the focus of at least the initial follow-up by a moderator. Donald Trump mixed an apology with promises to defeat ISIS, among other things, but repeatedly called it mere locker room talk. Did you think it was enough to stop the bleeding?
Well, that's not for me to decide, but that's where Trump has decided to stand, unapologetic, essentially, because if you describe it as mere locker room talk, that comes with a designation on your part that it's essentially harmless. And many people who heard those remarks, even if Donald Trump did not carry them out, did not find them to be harmless at all, either intent or if, in fact, that's what Donald Trump ever tried to do. And most women I've talked to don't regard it as harmless talk in the least. And if Trump ever tried to do that, and he said under some intense questioning from Anderson Cooper, well, he never really did. So it was an empty boast, but nevertheless, it's the kind of conversation that, yes, maybe some Trump supporters will put in a category of, well, that's just what men do. But that's not the conversation I've picked up. And I don't think that's the national conversation that has ensued. So when Trump describes it as locker room talk, he is essentially telling the country, I'm minimizing it. And that may not be something that most voters are comfortable with.
It's certainly a talk that will continue on Capitol Hill later today. But Nancy, as you mentioned, really, Clinton seemed willing to let Donald Trump exist in these spaces largely alone. Last night, she invoked a woman she called a friend, Michelle Obama, in that effort to go high when they go low. But she did have explaining to do herself as well, notably on the release via Wikileaks of certain portions of her speeches. And in fact, invoked Abraham Lincoln when she discussed a personal and public position and the need for two different ones. Do you think in saying that she was talking about Abraham Lincoln, was that enough of an explanation on that point?
Well, that explanation actually drew some laughter, but it was so unusual that she may get some benefit from people assuming that it must be true, because otherwise, why would you say something like that? Some backstory here. This was a speech that she gave back in 2013, and it was one of the few relatively contentious things that she said in those speeches that have now been made public thanks to hackers. She said that in policy, if you want to be successful, you have to have a public position and a private position. And that left some people thinking that maybe she's disingenuous, maybe she thinks one thing and says another, which is a rap that she already has in some circles. She argued, no, this is just part of good negotiating. It's something that Donald Trump probably wrote about in his book, Art of the Deal. You need to start out at one place, but be willing to go to another. And she used, as an example, Abraham Lincoln's efforts to get the 13th Amendment passed. And she said, well, he made one argument to one group of people and another argument to one group of people, and that's how he got it done. Donald Trump said that that was absurd, that she's lying, and that she's now blaming Honest Abe for her lies. It was a good line. Whether or not any of this really resonates is hard to tell, because it's all gotten so overshadowed by Trump's comments about women and his comments about women.
And Josh, just for a quick moment, I talked to the Trump campaign after that. They did not prepare Donald Trump for the Abraham Lincoln line. That was one of those things where Trump used his own gut instincts, his own sense of timing and how to deal with it, and they thought that was a smashing success. And yet in microcosm, within those 30 seconds, you saw the highs and lows of Donald Trump. You saw this great, on his toes, one-liner about Abraham Lincoln, and then within 30 seconds he says, I don't know anything about Russia. And then he says, no, I know something about Russians. And so he had to completely backtrack after saying something that in isolation is like a full-blown admission that he doesn't know anything about a very, very important foreign policy subject, also something the Clinton campaign routinely says about Trump. So in that 30 seconds, you saw, and the Trump campaign acknowledges, the highs and the lows of Donald Trump in a debate setting.
And he also continued, strangely, to deny the likelihood that Russia is behind some of these hackings, which is bizarre because the FBI has come out and said that they are almost certain that Russia is behind it. The entire intelligence community has come out and said that. So it's curious that a presidential candidate would say, I don't believe the entire intelligence apparatus. I think none of this happened, without providing any evidence or rationale for not wanting to believe the people who we put in charge in this country of trying to figure out who's doing bad things.
And on the subject, to be what could fairly be described, or certainly would be described by the Clinton camp as acting as an apologist for the Russians in this matter, only feeds the suspicions that the Hillary Clinton campaign has tried to stoke about what kind of relationship Donald Trump does or doesn't have with Russia, and what would his orientation to that country be should he be elected president.
He also, Major, in doing so with regard to Russia's involvement in Syria, broke ranks very publicly with his own running mate, Governor Mike Pence. I know you were actually in contact with some members of the Pence campaign last night. The sole reference to the governor last night by Donald Trump was, he and I haven't spoken and I disagree with him. What was the reaction by the Pence camp to what was said last night?
Wincing initially, and then taking your medicine and staying on the ticket and talking about how enthusiastic you are. That was sort of the coping mechanism and process as the night wore on. And the formulation the Trump campaign has developed in the aftermath is to say, when Mike Pence got that question about no-fly zones, he said, if there is an effort by anyone, the Syrians or the Russians, to violate a no-fly zone, should one be created, then the U.S. should use military force. When Trump heard the question last night, again, this is the Trump campaign formulation of all this, he thought the question from Anderson Cooper was about regime change. And Trump said, I'm not in favor of regime change, thinking that Mike Pence had suggested that, and therefore I disagree with him. So the Trump campaign is sort of conflating one question into a larger issue, saying that's what he disagreed with Pence on. Pence never said that. It's a bit convoluted, but in the main, Pence heard that, knows he was dissed on a probably the most public stage this campaign has seen, and before the largest audience, possibly, who's ever looked in on a conversation about this campaign. But nevertheless, Mike Pence is nothing if not a good and loyal soldier in this campaign and on this ticket. He'll be in North Carolina today, and I'm told will enthusiastically campaign for Trump the rest of the week. and thereafter.
Quickly for the both of you, and Nancy, you can go first here. It's been called the ugliest debate ever. The Washington Post spoke to last night as something that it was a dark turn, even in this election cycle. And yet, if it was thought perhaps that Hillary Clinton had won the first debate, is it fair to say perhaps that both candidates wake up today thinking they did what they had to do last night?
You know, if there's such a thing as preemptive cringing, Josh, that's what I was doing before this debate, because all the signs were there that it was going to be so ugly and so uncomfortable. And from the very beginning, when these two candidates didn't shake hands, which seemed by and large to be Hillary Clinton's decision to make a point of not shaking Donald Trump's hands, you knew things that were going to be tense. He called her a liar more than 9 times. He called her the devil at one point. He said more than once that she has hate in her heart. After the debate, I asked one of his top surrogates, Rudy Giuliani, what Donald Trump meant by that when he said she has hate in her heart. And he said, well, she certainly acts like she has hate in her heart when she says that half of Donald Trump's supporters are a basket of deplorables. So, you know, this was kind of a no-holds-barred situation. The Trump campaign knew that he had 2 missions, one to try to stop the bleeding on this videotape, but also, just as important, to show Republicans that he could take the fight to Hillary Clinton more specifically and more aggressively than he did in the first debate, when his performance was widely seen as less impactful than hers. And so he did that in spades last night.
One thing, Josh, I think is now true. This campaign has taken our collective national ability to gasp away from us. Think about what happened last night. At one moment, Donald Trump said, if I'm elected president, I will tell my attorney general to put together a special prosecutor to go after allegations that have been leveled against you. Fair enough. You can say that in a presidential campaign. And as long as you say, and I will accept my attorney general's conclusion on this matter, you've given yourself both legal, constitutional, and political space. But if you say, as Donald Trump said, if I'm in charge of the law, you'll be in jail, you are acting as judge, jury, and punisher in a political context. And that should induce a gasp from everyone in this country, collectively, because that's not how our system has ever been created or ever been discussed on a stage as important as this. And our ability to be shocked, apparently, has been exhausted. And I think that is, for me, one of the big takeaways from last night's debate.
Perhaps the takeaway. Nancy Cordes, Major Garrett, as always, we appreciate the insight.
You got it.
Thank you, Josh.